When it comes to your retirement, do you want to have the same old plan everyone else has? Of course not. You're unique and have your own goals and dreams. Don't be treated just like a number. This is your retirement. So it's time to think differently. And you're in luck because you've found the Retire Your Way podcast with ILG Financial. At ILG Financial, you won't find generic, run-of-the-mill plans containing the same old cookie-cutter solutions. Dave, Chase, and the ILG Financial team focus on building one retirement at a time using their Think Differently philosophy. And that means your own comprehensive plan with customized solutions built to achieve just one goal, yours. So put on your Think Differently hats and get ready to take back control of your retirement today and for all the tomorrows to come. ILG Financial's Retire Your Way podcast was created just for you, and it's starting right now.
Welcome to the Retire Your Way podcast with Chase Lopez, ILG Financial. I'm Ron Stutz, and we're going to talk about a very interesting topic today. We're going to talk about baby boomers, and it's going to be a very interesting conversation, I promise. Income, legacy, growth, it's all right here at ILG Financial. And Chase, first of all, how are you?
Oh, doing great. It always, I tell you this every time. It's always a pleasure. I look forward to this whenever I see it on my schedule to get together with you and record the podcast. So looking forward to the topic today. I think it's going to be very cogent for a lot of our listeners.
Well, the very best thing about it all is that you're going to pass along a lot of good information to a lot of folks out there. And so, I appreciate your explanation of all these questions that I come up with. And some of these questions are kind of off the wall. So, you have a good idea of how to take it and run with it and explain it. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Chase is going to talk about retiring boomers and bad news for workers. And you may hear that and wonder, well, what in the world is that all about? Well, for the past 50 years, the baby boomer generation, which is those folks born between 1946 and 1964, have worked through the American labor force at a steady pace. I mean, this has been going on for decades, but now the baby boomers are retiring, and that might be bad news for those left in the workplace. Chase Lopez is in an interesting position when it comes to speaking on this topic, as he spends his time helping boomers retire every day while also being on the other side of the coin as an active member of the workforce. So, Chase, I'll just tell you right up front, as everybody knows, I'm a baby boomer myself, and I know that Dave is a baby boomer. Mm-hmm. What exactly are we seeing happening in this retiree-worker ratio, and why is it worth looking into?
Well, first off, thank you for that intro. I don't think you could have, teed it up any better there, Ron. But one of the things that is being talked about both loudly, I feel like, but also not as loudly as it should be, as contradictory as that sounds, is the fact that the biggest generation, the baby boomer generation, over the last 100 years or so, is moving into retirement every single day, right? We have baby boomers retiring every single day, and the worker generations behind them, so Generation X, the millennial generation, Generation Z, all of those generations, each one of them are smaller than the baby boomer generation. Mm-hmm. And this is really the first time in a very long time in American history that this has been the case, right? Where the biggest generation is moving out of the workforce.
Yeah.
So it's going to create some challenges that we really haven't seen before. And I think for folks, especially those baby boomers that are retiring, they just want to be cognizant of the fact that this is happening, right? And we can make some adjustments to their overall plan, right? Based on some of these risks or some of these challenges that we foresee, coming down the pike.
I know that for a very long time that ratio of workers to retirees has held pretty steady, but now it's going down as so many boomers are retiring, and it's going to keep going that way.
That's right. And really, to put some numbers onto this, right, is when baby boomers were at age 20, there was about 4.9, let's call it 5, right? There's about 5 workers for every retiree in America, right? Mm-hmm. So to put that into context, right, there's 5 people working for every 1 person that is in retirement that's collecting Social Security, that's on Medicare, right? as baby boomers aged, that started to dwindle. So as baby boomers hit age 60, that went from 5 to 3.5 workers per retiree. And with baby boomers getting to, close to age 80, right, the front end of that baby boomer generation, we're now down to 2.2 workers per retiree. So you can see how the number of workers to the number of retirees has just been basically falling off a cliff over, the past 40 or 50 years. And it's funny to mention that term cliff, right? Falling off a cliff. There's actually a book, and it's a very well-renowned book. It's called The Demographic Cliff. It's by Harry Dent. I encourage the listeners, if you ever have a chance to pick it up, it's a great read. It's not too long or anything like that. But really what Harry Dent talks about is this phenomenon. It's the phenomenon that the baby boomer generation, if you go through American history and you look at the baby boomer generation, there's a bunch of innovations that were centered around this generation, right? So in the book, he talks about the Ford Mustang first came out when the baby boomer generation was in their 20s, right? Their 20s and their 30s. Yeah. It was a good car for that age group, right?
I think it was 1965 when the Mustang came out.
Yeah, that's right. And then the minivan, right, that came out a few years later. And why was that? Because the baby boomer generation started to have children, started to have families, right? And we saw a lot of people moving to more suburban areas around that time. So a lot of things going back in American history can be traced back to this baby boomer generation. So what does this mean, right? What does this mean as this large swath of the population starts to head into retirement? Well, the programs that we have, and I mentioned them before, Social Security, Medicare, right? Those are funded by workers, right? Yeah. You pay Social Security tax, you pay Medicare tax. If you've looked at your paycheck, you've seen that, right? Mm-hmm. You pay those taxes while you're working, and then the benefit is paid out to you once you stop working, right? So if this ratio becomes imbalanced where the workers aren't paying as much into these funds as the retirees taking it out, then we start to get into having a problem, right?
You can see how we might be in a little bit of trouble here because, so many people there are far more people retiring than there are coming into the workforce. And, you might think, hey, we're going to run out of money totally. So we see the worker-retiree ratio becoming lower than it's ever been. And as we mentioned before, it seems to be going in that direction. It's going to stay going that way for a while.
That's right. And if you Google funding shortfall for Social Security and for Medicare, you'll see articles written about it. You'll see government organizations have done studies. And this funding shortfall that they're talking about is exactly what you just kind of alluded to, right? They're saying, hey, there's going to be more people relying on these programs, Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, right? All three of those are specific for retirees. Mm-hmm. There's going to be more people leaning on these programs while not enough workers paying into them to pay for these benefits, right? And really one of the things that we're talking to folks about is this is going to, negatively affect more so than anyone else, probably the worker generation, right? The folks that are working now are going to have to pay more to keep these programs kind of going, right?
Yeah. So, older people who are baby boomers don't need to worry about this as much as younger workers out there. So, it's like this message is for both baby boomers today and those in the worker generation. My goodness, there's some things to think about. We might see some changes down the road.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. So this is going to have to be rectified, right? Something has to give. There's no way that, we can continue kind of on this path. Mm-hmm. So there's a couple of solutions that are out there, right? That, have been floated out there. And a couple of things have kind of just delayed this issue, altogether. The fact that baby boomers are working, later on into life, right? So that's one of the things, that's one of the fixes that, people within the community, within the Social Security community are talking about is, hey, and you've seen this, I'm sure, over your lifetime, Ron, let's move the full retirement age, the retirement age for Social Security. If we move it back, that forces people to stay in that worker cohort for longer, right? Mm-hmm. And then just delays them, collecting those benefits. So And we've seen that, right? The baby boomer generation has, been working a lot longer than the previous generations.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right.
So with that said, if these workers, if they make up a smaller share of the population than the boomers did at that generation, at that same time, right, then the way that we rectify it is we would have to move that age back, which we just talked about, or workers are going to have to pay more, right? And it's just a numbers game. A lot of people, the narrative out there is that the reason why we're having this issue is because young people don't want to work. Yeah. That's not really the case, right? It's just really a numbers thing, like we were talking about before. It's just there's just not a sheer number of workers to help alleviate this huge swath of individuals, moving into that retirement age.
They just make up a smaller share of the population than boomers did at the same age, and that's really the crux of this whole thing.
That's right. And one of the things that, going back to what we were talking about, why the baby boomer generation should be a little bit concerned about this issue, is one of the biggest expenses in retirement, right? Once you get later on into retirement, is this long-term care or assisted living care issue, right? Yeah. If we need long-term care, if we need assisted living, well, how are we going to pay for it? And oftentimes what ends up happening is these younger folks in this younger generation, they end up having to become caregivers for either their parents, their uncles, their grandparents, whoever the person may be, but they end up having to be caregivers for this baby boomer generation as they begin to grow older. And if they become those caregivers, they're taken out of the workforce, right? And thus they're not being able to contribute to these programs because they're, it's basically unpaid work, right?
My goodness,
So it's just, there's a whole host of issues that are kind of tied in to this one big fact, right? The fact that this huge generation is, moving into retirement and coming out of the workforce.
One thing I think is that boomers tended to have fewer kids than their parents did. In the generation ahead of them, they would sometimes have families with 6, 7, 8 children. You don't see that very much these days, and that's something that's moving that trend along as well, and it's happening with every generation since the boomers came along.
That's right. As we've kind of moved from to your point, they're called the baby boomers for a reason, right? That's why they got their name, because there was a boom of people having children when they were born, right? That's kind of the inception of the name. So to your point, every generation after then have been having less and less children for a variety of reasons, right? Some of them have been very good for society, right? Women have been able to work more, right? They've had more, opportunities in the workforce. And naturally they were the caregivers, over time for families. So if they've been working more, just results in families having less children. And then just the cost of living has gone up a lot. So that has tied into a lot of folks, wanting to have less children. But you're exactly right in that's what's contributing to this demographic cliff that we're seeing, not only with the people themselves, but with the funding for a lot of these programs.
This demographic shift, or cliff as you call it, is certainly making a big difference. And we'll talk about that more in just a second. You're listening to the Retire Your Way podcast with the one and only Chase Lopez of ILG Financial, Stafford, Virginia. And if you would like some help, you can call Chase and have a conversation with him about your situation. You got more questions about this, talk to him, 540-720-5656. That's 540-720-5656. Chase, can you break down how this demographic shift contributes to the economy and why we're going to see this huge impact?
Yeah, so, and this is really, when we talk about all of these trends and things like that, this is what really people care about, right? How is it going to affect the economy? How is it going to affect, my pocketbook? So as boomers, exit from the workforce, it's largely, like I had said before, it's largely been cushioned by the fact that baby boomers have just worked later than previous generations, right? Some into their 60s, some all the way into their 70s, because of longer lifespans. And also, there's a lot of jobs now that aren't, very physically demanding. You have to, of course, be sharp mentally, but they're not very physically demanding. So that allows people just to work work longer. So there's some financial incentives there. This trend, it was reversed for a little bit during the COVID pandemic, right? But we've seen a lot of folks that ended up retiring then come back into the workforce because, to my first point, the financial incentives have just been so good, and they're, again, not physically demanding jobs. So we've seen a lot of this generation, that ended up retiring during the pandemic, maybe come back into the workforce to earn some more money. But with that said, the workforce now, as an average, is older than it's ever been.
Yeah,
which makes sense.
Yeah.
Which makes sense, right? If the biggest generation that we've ever seen is working longer, well, that's going to bring the overall age of the workforce up. So just to give you some context, in 1984, people under 40, they made up more than 60% of the workforce. Mm-hmm. Today, people under 40 only make up about 45% of the workforce.
Wow,
right?
That's a big change.
And it's just the numbers, right? It just goes back to what we were talking about before. This over 40 cohort, right, is just a lot bigger than the under 40 cohort. So the numbers are going to be skewed that way. So with that being the case, that's just going to what we were talking about before about the economy and how it's going to affect everyone. This is leading to a growing number of retirees having the demand for those healthcare services, not just the long-term care I was talking about, but your routine medical procedures, right? Your doctor's appointments. And the reality is, once we get older, there's just more doctor's appointments kind of in the cards, right?
Yeah. The good news is people are living longer. The bad news is people are living longer.
That's right. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So if that's being the case, well, what do we need? We need infrastructure to support that. We need doctors. We need nurses. We need caregivers to help facilitate all of that. So what we're seeing, and you may have seen these articles, Ron, but there's articles out there. There's a lot of people talking about how doctors right now, nurses, that cohort is getting a lot older as well. And we're not seeing the same amount of younger people go into those professions, which can lead to some consequences down the line when, we're going to need a lot of these care professions, right? Yeah. So it's leading to, going back to my original point, right? It's leading to just a lot of people family members, friends, stepping into these roles that would have previously been filled by professionals inside of the care community.
We're kind of short on those healthcare professionals already, and I can see that trend getting worse as the number of people who need care, continues to increase. So, it's kind of a catch-22 there.
That's right. Think about this. If we just keep the same amount of doctors that we have today, but the people that need doctors and need doctors visits goes up, well, then by definition, we have a growing discrepancy there, right? Even if we just stay steady with, the care professionals.
I would assume that along with healthcare issues on both sides of the coin, we would see similar issues in the long-term care arena. I mean, that is one thing that most people don't really like to talk about. They don't even like to think about the fact that they're going to need long-term care, but a big percentage of us will at some point.
Oh, man. I'm so glad you brought that up, because this is one of the number one things that we talk to a lot of clients about, right? It's, hey, the likelihood is that if you're a couple, right, one or both of you will need long-term care or assisted living care at some point in your life, right? Hopefully it's not for a long time, but at some point you're going to need it. And it's not a fun conversation to have, if I'm being quite frank about it, right? It's not fun to think about the fact that you may need that in the future, but it can be one of the biggest expenses that the elderly, population can incur. And if these care shortages continue, it's just simply supply and demand, right? If there's less care professionals available, that just means that the cost of care will have to go up, right? Yeah. If there's more demand, less supply, the cost is going to have to go up. So really, you want to get, again, and this is a theme of all of our podcasts, right, Ron, is make sure with your financial professional, your financial planner, you are addressing this issue of having to pay for some sort of long-term care or assisted living care, right? Whether that be out of your savings, whether that be you get some sort of insurance policy to pay for it. You want to make sure that you're covered for this in the future so that you don't have to drain your savings to basically zero in order to be on Medicaid, right? Medicaid is the program that pays for long-term care, but you essentially has to drain your savings to zero
exactly
in order to qualify.
Yeah, it's kind of a last resort type thing. And, you know, expenses for long-term care are just, sky high already. And this situation is going to continue to get worse. And let me just ask you one more question here. You mentioned this earlier. You mentioned about the people who are providing ongoing support to their family members. People who maybe can't afford or find care in some kind of a facility. Relatives have the responsibility fall on them, and for the caregivers, this kind of informal and unpaid work can lead to a lot of strain. I mean, we're talking about a lot of stress, and I know that a lot of people who are listening to this podcast know exactly what I'm talking about.
No, that's exactly right. I think last time we checked, about 1 in 5 U.S. adults, so 20%, already provide ongoing support for either close friends or family members in kind of the caregiving space. Mm-hmm. And that not only can lead to financial strain, which you alluded to, but also this can lead to some what's the resentment, I guess is the right word,
exactly,
right? Between the fact of, hey, I have to go and, work my, 9-to-5 job every day, and then I'm taking care of, this friend or this family member. It can kind of lead to some resentment there. So naturally, with this population shift, we will see more and more this phenomenon kind of happening. So that's why it's even more imperative for folks to get ahead of this before it does end up happening. So you don't have to put, a family member or a friend in the position of saying, hey, I'm going to have to take care of this person because, they can't take care of themselves anymore.
And one thing that the last thing I wanted to mention here is that, oftentimes when there's a married couple, they've been together for 40, 50 years, whatever, one of them falls under some kind of a health problem and needs long-term care, and the spouse provides that care in the house, and oftentimes what you see is the health really declines on the part of the spouse who's providing the health care, because that is a really tough situation to be in. So then you have two people who are sick and need help.
No, that's exactly right. And some of that is psychological, right?
Sure.
With just being around that person, but also some of it is physical as well. To your point, and these caregivers, it's a pretty physical job if someone, depending on, someone's care need, right? It can be a pretty physically taxing, endeavor. So psychologically and physically and I'm glad you brought that up, to the spouse that is not sick, it can lead to some unfortunate consequences for that person as well.
Well, the bottom line in all of this is that if you get in touch with Chase Lopez and Dave Lopez at ILG Financial, they can help you prepare for these eventualities. And things are going to be changing, and they're already changing. Things are going to be changing in the future, and you need to be prepared for all of those things. And is there anything else that we haven't talked about when it comes to baby boomers and those in the younger worker generations who are going to have to maybe make some changes in their lifestyle or their budgeting process because of so many of these baby boomers who are walking off into the sunset in retirement?
Yeah, so I think there's just one more kind of topic I wanted to just broach with this. And a lot of people ask me, well, Chase, I appreciate all of the information, right? But what's the solution here? What's the solution? How are we going to, kind of rectify this discrepancy that we've been talking about here for the last few minutes or so? Mm-hmm. And at least on the surface, right, they've done the math, and starting in 2033, so that's about 10 years from now, Social Security won't be able to make the full payments that they are obligated to unless Congress does something to rectify this, right? So when we think about how they can rectify it, there's a couple of things that they can do. And we've kind of briefly touched on them, up until this point. But I just want to reiterate the fact that there are fixes that are available. Don't like to sound too dire on the podcast, right? There are fixes that are available. Congress just has to, do something to rectify this at some point, right?
Yeah.
So there's either you could, start to raise the taxes on the working folks. And, Ron, I'm sure you've noticed this and your paychecks over the years. This has happened, right? This has happened before.
Absolutely.
The Social Security and the Medicare tax, what you see as FICA on your paycheck stub, that's gone up before. We're probably going to have to raise that, even more to kind of cover a lot of these issues that we're talking about.
There's really no choice.
That's right. And what they'll do is they'll move the retirement age, back, not for baby boomers, right, but for the generations after. They'll just move that age back, and that'll help provide some relief for the baby boomer generation that's retiring now. And quite frankly, I would argue that's not really unwarranted. Most likely, if with medical advancements and everything like that, the current worker generation is probably going to outlive the baby boomer generation.
Yeah.
Just like the baby boomer generation outlived the previous generation, right? Yeah. So I don't think it's completely unwarranted to say, hey, for the next generations, they move the retirement age back because they're going to live longer, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So I say all that to say this can all sound impossible, right? It can sound a little bit dejecting, but it doesn't have to be. To your point, the main takeaway here is that you need to set yourself up for success, no matter what is happening economically, socially, politically, or even personally. Though it isn't always pleasant addressing these kind of things, as we've kind of talked about already today. The benefit is that you can plan for it. And we've talked about this, ad nauseum, Ron, but that's really what we do. We help folks, address these things in advance so that when they happen, we are not making any, rash decisions. So it's important to get with your financial professional, whoever that is, and work out a comprehensive income plan or retirement plan, that addresses all the things so that no matter what happens, you're good to go.
If you want to have a conversation about this, if you're a baby boomer or if you're younger, call 540-720-5656. Income, legacy, growth, it's all right here. Conversations about Medicare, long-term care, whatever you want to talk about, ILG Financial is the place to do it, and it's about helping you plan for retirement your way so you can achieve your financial goals. Call ILG Financial at 540-720-5656, or you can go online to ilgfinancial.com to learn more. This has been the Retire Your Way podcast with Chase Lopez. We appreciate your listening. Chase, it's been good to hang out with you for a while.
Oh, it's always good to hang out with you, Ron. Can't wait till the next one. And always looking forward to getting some new information out to the listeners.
We hope you will join us on the next Retire Your Way podcast from ILG Financial. The information provided is for educational purposes only and is not intended as investment advice for any individual or entity. All information contained herein is believed to be from reliable sources. However, we make no representation as to its completeness or accuracy. The views presented today are those of Dave Lopez and do not necessarily represent the views of the Alpha Star Capital Management, LLC. The opinions expressed are subject to change without notice and do not constitute financial, legal, or tax advice. Please consult your financial professional before executing any financial strategy. Investment advisory services offered through Alpha Star Capital Management, LLC, a registered investment advisor. Alpha Star and ILG Financial, LLC are independent entities. SEC registration does not constitute an endorsement of the firm by the Commission, nor does it indicate that the advisor has attained a particular level of skill or ability.